Does Andre Drummond deserve consideration to be a top 10 Piston of all time? Based on how the fan base viewed him, he was one of the more polarizing players that I can recall during my time as a fan of this team. I'm not going to say he is or is not in my top 10 in this video. I'm going to make a couple of cases for both sides, and then after that, I'm probably just going to let you, the viewer, decide. Here are the cases that I'm going to be making for both sides. It's a little bit deeper than these two for each side, but they're the general things I'm going to be going over. He does deserve consideration, in my opinion, because in terms of all-time Piston statistics, he ranks very well. And he carried the Pistons a little bit more than you think and more than he gets credit for. Now, why he might not end up making the cut is because of the lack of team success. And probably the biggest case for why I could see him getting left off the list by me or you, the viewer, is that he kind of choked in the playoffs. But let's go over why he deserves consideration first. All of these totals are strictly Drummond's time on the Detroit Pistons. Assuming Drummond played his last game before the trade deadline as a member of the Pistons, I mean, who knows? Maybe he'll come back at the end of his career sort of like Ben Wallace did or like Chauncey Billups did. But that's aside the point. As of right now, Drummond has 8,531 points as a member of the Pistons, and that ranks 11th all-time in Pistons history. 8,199 rebounds as a member of Detroit. That is second in Pistons history. 823 steals. That is fifth in Pistons history. 927 blocks. That is third in Pistons history. Now, the steals and blocks are slightly incomplete because Lanier, in particular, came into the league before they started recording steals and blocks as official stats. But even if they did record blocks and steals as official stats, I'm pretty sure Drummond would still be in the top 10 in both. He might not have been top 5 in both, but I feel pretty confident in saying he probably still would have been top 10. Drummond, as a member of the Pistons, had 6 10-10 1-1 seasons. It could be 10 points, 10 assists, 1 steal, or 1 block, or 10 points, 10 rebounds, 1 steal, and 1 block per game. In Drummond's case, he had 6 seasons as a member of Detroit, averaging 10 points, 10 rebounds, 1 steal, and 1 block. And that is the most in Pistons history. Now, in all honesty, I'm pretty sure Bob Lanier probably would be number 1 if they recorded steals and blocks at the beginning part of his career. But it's worth noting, Drummond was a very productive player for us. I should also note that 6 10-10 1-1 seasons includes the 2019-2020 season in which Drummond got traded. 402 double-doubles. That is second most in Pistons history. 41 2020 games. That is tied with Bob Lanier as number 1. And that puts him top 2 in Pistons history. So, Drummond was polarizing, but in my opinion, his production is definitely not. Now, with the production in mind, one thing that Drummond might not have always gotten the credit he deserves for is carrying the Pistons. Starting in the 2015 and 16 season, going all the way to the 2018-19 season, I excluded 2019 and 2020 because he got traded. But since the 2015-16 season, Drummond has led the Pistons in 3 out of 5 categories in 4 straight seasons. Since 2015-16, Drummond has led the Pistons in rebounds, blocks, and steals. And he did this mostly with a relatively weak supporting cast around him. As far as I could find, Drummond only played with 1 player in his entire career that averaged 20-plus points per game. Also, he never had an all-star point guard or shooting guard. He had Derrick Rose before he got traded, but this was way towards the end of Rose's career and a way past his prime Derrick Rose. But let's seriously talk about the 2015-16 season really fast, because he carried his team to the playoffs probably a little more than he'll get credit for. In that season, he led the team in rebounds, blocks, and steals. He had Reggie Jackson as his point guard. He had 0 20-point per game scorers around him, and he only had 1 15-point per game scorer around him, and that was Reggie Jackson. So Drummond may not have carried the team on offense that much, but he carried the team in other ways. And also, he's just carried the team not always with his scoring, but in plenty of other ways just during his time with the Pistons in general. Now, I don't want to make it sound like what he did in the 2015-16 season was something completely unheard of and that it had never been done before. There are probably a decent amount of centers throughout NBA history that probably could have taken that squad to the playoffs, like Hakeem Olajuwon or Shaq or something like that. But with all that said, what Drummond did in the 2015-16 season is certainly a notable accomplishment. In the 2018-19 season, Drummond played with the first player that managed to average 20 plus points per game in his career in Blake Griffin. Blake Griffin did have a large workload in terms of scoring, and he had a large workload on offense, but in the other categories, in particular blocks, steals, and rebounds, Drummond led the team in those categories. So the 2018-19 season wasn't as good record-wise as the 2015-16 season. However, Drummond played a very substantial role in getting his team to the playoffs in the 2018-19 season. Now, the Pistons did get swept in both of their playoff appearances with Drummond, but I guess that's what happens when you don't have the best supporting cast. Here are some notable players that led the Pistons in 3 out of 5 categories in multiple seasons. All of this is during the regular season. Andre Drummond, during his time with the Pistons, led his team in 3 out of 5 stats 4 times. It would have been 5 times if he did not get traded in the 2019-2020 season. Ben Wallace led his team in 3 out of 5 stats 6 times. Grant Hill led his team in 3 out of 5 stats 4 times, and I actually found some instances of him leading his team in 4 out of 5 stats. Isaiah Thomas led his team in 3 out of 5 stats 4 times. Bob Lanier is another Piston that led his team in 3 out of 5 stats multiple times, and he did it 5 times. And in all honesty, it was probably a little bit more than 5 times because steals and blocks were not recorded during the entirety of Lanier's career. In all seriousness though, this is some pretty good company to be in. So this is the part where I officially begin to play devil's advocate and start to make the case as to why he might not make the cut. Drummond was carrying his team, but he was carrying his team unsuccessfully. I'm sure that there are plenty of people that will make the argument that in order to be carrying your team, you gotta be winning. And I support that argument to an extent, but, maybe if Drummond had a better supporting cast, maybe his leading the team in 3 out of 5 stats wouldn't have looked so hollow. And also, just to be the good guy for a second again, if we're going to say Drummond was carrying his team unsuccessfully, then that means Bob Lanier was also carrying his team unsuccessfully. The Pistons had a losing record in 3 out of the 5 seasons where Lanier led the Pistons in 3 out of 5 stats. So the last thing that we're going to be going over in this video is Andre Drummond's playoff performances. I took his regular season production with the Pistons from the 2015-16 season through the 2019-2020 season because 2015-2016 was the year that Drummond officially entered his prime and officially came into his own. But as we can clearly see, Drummond's production in the playoffs dropped a little bit. He went from averaging 15.8 points per game to 15.5 points per game. His rebounds dropped like a rock from 15.1 rebounds per game to 11. His assists even went down. His blocks went down. His steals per game went down. His turnovers also did go down, so that's certainly notable. His field goal percentage dropped from 52.8% in the regular season to 48.1% in the playoffs. And I'm sure we all remember Game 3 against Milwaukee. That was probably Drummond's worst game as an NBA player. But everyone's had a bad game before, so I'm not going to hold that one game over his head, but I definitely felt bad for the dude in that game because it was rough. But yeah, I basically went over the 2 reasons that Drummond may or may not make the cut. But I guess you guys just let me know in the comment section whether he should or should not make the cut. Hopefully I gave some of you viewers a little bit of a different perspective on Andre Drummond. I'm not going to rank Andre Drummond's career as it pertains to all-time Pistons in this video. That will be for a different time. And I'm not going to decide if he's top 10 or not in this video either. Drummond is absolutely worthy of consideration of making my personal top 10 list. Whether he ends up making it or not, we will see. Personally, I'm not going to use the Pistons' lack of winning against him because it's a team game. I'm not going to be ranking all-time Piston teams. I'm going to be ranking all-time Piston players. Now, one thing that might hurt him when it comes to me or you guys ranking him is his decrease in his playoff production. But we'll see what happens whenever that time comes. But like I said, hopefully I gave you viewers a different perspective on Andre Drummond. But let me know what you think. Should Andre Drummond be a top 10 Piston of all time, or should he not be a top 10 Piston of all time? Where would you personally rank him? Let me know in the comments below, and as always, thank you for watching.